Okay, it's recording now. Okay, so just as an introduction, before we start, welcome and thank you everybody for coming to the first learning seminar of the year with Charlie Fitzpatrick. In the past, we organized these learning seminars for our team as a commitment to our values. However, this year we wanted to try something new and invite members of the community in as well. A link will also be shared afterwards that will be distributed to university students as well as members of the community. So for those who are not familiar with what JAM does, JAM seeks to democratize the availability of true and accurate information for decision makers. We have developed a platform to help energy companies and consultants understand their sustainability and ESG metrics in order to make informed decisions. The format of the seminar will be as follows. We're going to start with Charlie giving his presentation, and we'll then open the floor up to any questions in the last 15 minutes of the seminar. If you have a question, please pop a Q in the chat and we'll go down the list afterwards. If you cannot take yourself off of mute, feel free to type the question and I will ask it for you. This session will be recorded for later viewing for anyone who cannot make it today or would like to review the seminar afterwards. So I guess I'll pass it over to Charlie.
Wow, thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity. Thank you all for giving up some time. I know that time is the most important thing, or one of the several most important things in everybody's life these days. So I'll try to use it wisely. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I get to work for Esri, and this is a company that makes geographic information systems technology, software that people use essentially to make maps. And when Maggie asked me if I would speak, I thought, are you sure you have the right person? After we were going back and forth a little bit, she indicated that she had found a document that I had written some years back, and it was about data, and it was about students in schools needing to be comfortable working with data. The company that I work for, GIS Company, software company that works for people in all different kinds of industries. We make these tools for people to use so that they can essentially understand what's where, why is it there, and so what. That trio, what's where, why is it there, so what, was what I used to have at the top of my classroom chalkboard. I was a teacher back in the chalk days. So let me do just a little bit of introduction of me and the way that I see the world so that you can understand why Maggie was interested or not. So here's me. I'm going to use what we call a story map. And this is Charlie's world. Somebody asked me to put together a little example of a story map. And so I said, okay, I'll put one together about me. So I grew up in Minnesota. So that's why I talk funny. I grew up as the youngest of 4 boys. And we grew up out in the country. And so this is a long time ago, sort of late Pleistocene. But this is like 1957. I was about 3 or 4. And so we're surrounded by data. And one of the things that I wanted people to do was to be thinking about all different kinds of data and how you encounter data and what you can do with data. And so when I was in college, I was studying climate change as part of one of my experiences working in the Juneau ice field in Alaska. And so it was a sort of a mind-blowing experience for me to discover, hey, things really did change dramatically in a relatively short time. And wow, we need to have, there must be data about all of this stuff. I didn't think about it at the time, but I was really actually sort of into looking at data and lots of different types of data. I started teaching. I was raised as a biologist, became a geographer in college, finished and started teaching, and still had time in the summer to do some things. And so one year I went to Nepal, do a little hiking around with some people because I was intrigued with some of these places. But back in the classroom, as a geography teacher, I spent most of my time teaching junior high kids. I taught 7th through 12th grade social studies. And so this is a picture of me on one day during Geography Awareness Week, when I said, okay, I'm Captain Geography. Basically, the kids that I had in class were doing different kinds of activities, working with data in different ways, different expressions of data. And this is back in the Apple IIe era. I got my computer start on an Apple IIe, and I had students doing some data entry and data exploration as part of their activities, and recognized, wow, this is what people need to be doing more and more of. So when I saw GIS in the year 1991, school year 91-92, I said, wow, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. The company said, we need somebody to help us move this into the classroom. And so that's what I've been doing since 1992, is working to help schools engage GIS in the classroom so that they can understand data, understand complex situations, and be able to cope with lots of questions that we all go through just working through life. In my free time, when we can all travel, what I like to do is to spend some time exploring data around coral reefs, thinking about climate change from a different perspective. But I don't get to do as much of that as I would like. So going back to helping schools get GIS into their classroom, we've made some headway, but not enough. And so this is a look at one of our tools. This is another story map where I've embedded a map. And we believe that maps ought to be explored and tinkered with and monkeyed with. And so these are the schools in the United States. I have there's a Esri corollary, Esri Canada, that is taking care of schools in Canada. And there's a Charlie, her name is Jean, in Toronto, who oversees the K-12 program. And so these are maps that we want people to be thinking of, understanding what's where. Maps are really good about looking at what's where. People then have to ask, well, why is it there? And then, okay, so what? So we talk about data in terms of layers of information. And we want people to explore that. And just as an example of the kind of thing that I would have people go through in an early activity, and I used to do this even back in my classroom. It was much harder to do back then. But here is a map looking at the last 30 days of earthquakes around the world. Now it's actually two different layers of data, so I'm going to make it a little bit simpler. I'm going to turn off the top layer, which was about depth. Instead, what we're looking at is the same layer displayed a second time, and you're seeing magnitude. Now, I made this map back in 2012, 2013, sometime around then. And so it's looking at the last 30 days. Here's one from January of 2021. How did I make a map back then that is giving the data now? It was pointing to a data set that the USGS was putting up online and has been updating on a consistent basis ever since then. And so what you're looking at is looks like 1,762 pieces of information. And because these are latitude longitudes, the computer says, hey, that's just math. I can go in and drop those guys on the map and display them. And oh, if you want me to scale them according to one of the fields, that's great. If you want me to turn that layer off and turn this layer on so that we're looking at it by depth, and we can start to see some interesting patterns here. Gosh, why is it that let's see, what does this mean here? Shallower is darker, lighter is deeper. Why are the deeper quakes underneath the mountains and the shallower quakes underneath the trenches? And does that happen in other places around the world? Like this one. Here's a nice trench with shallow earthquakes in here and deep earthquakes there. Things happen in someplace. And there's a pattern. There are patterns and relationships. That's what geography is all about, patterns and relationships, all kinds of data. And so that's what all of these industries work with, is data that is relevant to them, whether it's about business and logistics, health and human services, government, sustainable industries, sustainable operations, whatever it happens to be. So where's all this data come from? That's one of the questions that people ask. Does Esri have a big data warehouse in the sky that has all of the data that exists? And I said, imagine what everybody on the planet ate for breakfast. No, that doesn't exist as a data set that somebody has. There's data that hasn't been gathered, and there's data that you can gather on the fly. So what I want to do is actually have you work with a data gathering tool that we have. We build these tools and bundle tools together to collaborate and help people experience some things. So I've put together a little survey. So if you can, oh, I can drop this into the chat stream here. Got to pull that up here. And you can click on it. And this one just has 5 short questions, the last of which is a map question. So I'm going to call it up. You could have used your phone to look at the QR code and with your camera on, and it would say, oh, do you want me to open in a browser? Sure, that would work. Or you can just click on it here. And what I want you to do is to give an identifier, not your name, like a pet's name, your favorite food, your superhero, anything like that. Your favorite subject before you were age 13, and I'm only giving you several choices. And it's a pick one for your favorite subject. If you have preferred operating systems, you can pick any number. The year that you finished high school, that'll be an integer, something between, say, 1950 and 2020. And then the magic of this is that you get to tie all of that information to a place on the map. Just, you can wiggle the map, you can click on the map, you can zoom, you can type in a place like Calgary, and you can click and drop it there. Once you're done, go ahead and hit submit. And I'm going to look at the data. Ooh, we have interesting data. And I'm going to even refresh and see if we have any more. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So right here, we've got some data. You guys just generated some data. And this is what we try to get people to recognize is there's all kinds of things that you can do with different data visualization tools. You can click on these and say, aha, here's Alfred, whose favorite subject was English, language, arts, something like that. Finished high school in 2010. And so you can work your way through these data explorations. And that's what all of these people are doing, is working with boatloads of data, layers of information that they use to solve problems. And that's what people have been doing looking at the coronavirus. You're probably all familiar with this dark gray with deep red coronavirus display. I'm not sure if any of you have played with it. Here in the United States, we're not doing ourselves any favors with our behaviors and our operations. We have more than twice as many as the next highest country. And what we get to see in this dashboard, the different counties, and over on the left-hand side, in case you've never played with this, I've got countries here first. And when I click on a country, the graph is showing the number of cases, daily cases. And so if I say, okay, rather than just looking at the country of the United States, let me jump to a single state. What state is doing the worst job of it? It's our most populous state right now. It's California. And here you can see California's graph. So it's trying to get people to understand different expressions of data and how they can cope with it. And one of the other ways that we have for people to work with this is this COVID pulse map. Here you can see the COVID cases on a state-by-state basis over time. So these graphs are time-based. And here I want to actually look at this one a little bit more closely. And California was doing a different job. Now, California has probably 100 times more people than North Dakota does. So what you have to keep in mind is sort of some of the challenges about thinking about data in this fashion. But here, let's just zoom in a little bit so that you can see the county level displays, getting people to understand scale of data, resolution of data, where's the data coming from, the currency of data, what do I do with data? We're surrounded by data. That's what we try to get people to do, is to see all of the different ways that they can use data to help them solve problems. And a lot of times we like to put these things together in what we call story maps that will not just give somebody a spreadsheet like, here's the, oh, I wanted this one. Here's my earthquake map. Now, you might have been able to look at this and make sense of it. I'm not able to do that. But when I displayed it in a map, it made much more sense for me. And that's what we try to get people to see, is that there are lots of data sets out there. There are lots of stories to tell. We want people to develop the capacity to work with data, to think about the lines that shape our city, or something about food, or let's look at favorite stories of 2020. What have we got? Well, here are our, community stories. So these are stories put together by people within the community about segregation, about a real hero in the US, Dolores Huerta, about things that you can't see in a river, about celebrating a person, an individual person, a Neolithic mystery tour. We've got all kinds of ways of thinking about what is it that people are doing with this. Well, we try to start this out with people who are even very young and comfortable working with little graphic representations, who might want to say, oh, I don't want to see the world that way. I want to see the world this way, or maybe like this. But I want to see the world from Canada looking south and seeing things this way. You can do all of these kinds of things with data that you can work on, and all of these different perspectives help you see patterns and relationships and understand the world in a different way. So that's the quick and dirty about what I do, working with educators around the country, working with education influencers, is try to get people to understand why and how to work with these tools that deal with data. Maggie, were there any questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Charlie. That was really, I think this is the most interactive seminar we've ever had, like ever. It's pretty awesome. I have a question myself, and if anyone else has a question, feel free to pop a Q in the chat, and then we'll go down the list to answer them. But I guess my first question for you, Charlie, is, okay, so because your career has spanned like for so long, and then at some point in the middle of that was when there was like computers and technology everywhere, and in the classrooms kids were getting in on it, so I wanted to ask you, how has technology changed in the classroom from when you started your career into how you're seeing it now? Not only like, oh, it's a new machine, there's a new type of thing, but how are kids using it, or why is it important to teach them young?
Wow. Wow. Oh, let me give you an example. Every year when we have our user conference, one of the things that I get to do is to work with students and help them do a presentation on stage in front of GIS users from around the world. We didn't get to do that in 2020, but the head of the company has enabled me to do that as part of my mission. 2019, these were 2 seniors and a 9th grader who went out with their teachers in Northern Ireland looking at how do Catholics and Protestant kids see the same places in different ways. Kids from different schools together going out at the very same time, and everybody responding on their phone about this place and how do they feel, how would they feel here on a Saturday night. To be able to do that now is supremely easy. To do that back when I started teaching would have been, we couldn't have done that. It would have been grab your little pencil and paper and record where we are, and then laboriously gather all of this information up, and then how would we integrate it all. They went back into the classroom that day and looked at the data from 45 kids visiting 15 sites. And it was mind-blowing what they were coming up with just on the fly then. The ability to do that is making it so that kids these days can discover things with lightning speed because they're so good at the technology, and they can ask questions saying, why is this? Why are these kids thinking this way about this place that I love? And asking interesting questions. Here, a few years back, we had 4th graders. So that's 9 years old, that got up on stage and showed what they're doing, making maps, analyzing data. And some of the adults in the audience came up to me afterwards and said, these kids are doing stuff that we don't do. So when I started teaching, I was teaching for 5 years before I got my hands on an Apple IIe and said, wow, this is actually making a difference. So my teaching career began essentially with no computers. I taught for 4 years with a computer, and all I did was word processing. And then I saw databases and I thought, oh my God, what can I do with databases? And I taught students about AIDS as a way to help them understand 4 columns of data about 50 states and ask questions going back and forth, so that as they got comfortable working with that, then we started looking at 30 different pieces of data about 200 different countries. And they knew how to do that because they had worked with data enough. It makes all the difference in the world.
Wow, thank you for that answer, Charlie. It was very passionate. I love that. We have 2 questions in the chat. The first one is from Garang. So I'm going to call on Garang. You can unmute yourself and ask Charlie.
Hi, thank you, Maggie. And thank you, Charlie, for coming. We really do appreciate such seminars, and it's really good to see this perspective of use of data. And I think my question is going to be straight to the data itself. So looking at your software, it looks like you guys have phenomenal data, and the way you guys build the layers is really it's top notch. So I was just wondering, do you have any input on the quality of the data that you guys host in your software, or how does that work?
That's the most important question for people to ask, is where's this data come from? So different people put together different data. And I should back up. Esri is particularly focused on producing tools that people use to make data, to analyze data. We're first and foremost a software company, but people said, oh, can you help us working with data, can you help provide some data? So we have put together data. And here in ArcGIS Online, up online, if you can imagine all these users putting together data and throwing it up online, some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be awful. But the tool doesn't know when you're putting it together what's going to make it good or bad. It's up to the people. And so we try to teach people about metadata so that they can answer the question of where's this data coming from? So here with my earthquakes, I can read about the map, which is using data that is coming from the USGS so that people can see, aha, I can go in and look at the format of the data. So we try to teach people about when you're doing this properly, you're giving people the information about how the data were created, what it's particularly good in use for, what it's not really great to use for. And so there's not necessarily good data and bad data. There's good and bad data for particular purposes. And we try to help people understand how to ask questions about the data, where to look for it, and when you're putting it together, how to put that information together. The data that you guys created, I don't know if any of it's accurate. I don't know if these are true. You may have made up some of this stuff. And so that's the hard part about generating data.
Thank you so much. That is good to know. Back to you, Maggie.
The next question is from James, and James asks, does Charlie see any areas in which GIS technologies are underused?
We're used in all different kinds of industries. The challenge is we're not used in every instance in all of these different industries. I think we're not used well enough in decision making, in policy decision making. And I think so we've tried to make it easier for people to use GIS or to get some experience using GIS in making policy or making decision about things. It's very easy to do about physical things. Earth science data there's gobs and gobs and gobs of earth science data, and earth science people use our tools and use them to make all kinds of analyses all the time. Lots of people make policy decisions just thinking about things and not really understanding data. One of the experiences that we put together was about, let me think about this. What was this? I'm going to have to remember this one. There is we have a whole series of content about policy. And so I wrote a couple of blogs about how to assemble one of these. And I just want to see 259. Okay. How to be working with these policy maps. So we make public policy maps. We've collected a whole bunch of them. And so people can say, hey, I want to see some pre-existing maps that I can go in and play with. And so right here, this is going to allow me to go in and explore about 500 different pre-constructed maps. about policy-related content, about people-related content, transportation and infrastructure, resilience and sustainability. This is in the United States. And there are similar kinds of layers about other countries. I don't know exactly where they all are for Canada and around other countries around the world, but I know that a lot of data layers exist in other countries in a similar fashion, not necessarily all of them. In the US, we make a lot of data, and if it's made by federal agencies, then it has to go out to people. That makes life, we live in a data-rich community that way. And so I think if I could, wave my wand, it would be getting people to be working with policy data.
Thank you, Charlie. That was very, you wrote a lot of information, blogs from that.
Yes, well, I've been at the job for a while.
That's awesome. I think we have enough time for one more question, and this last one is coming from Jackson. So Jackson, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
There we go. I realized it wasn't coming through. Thank you, Charlie, for coming today. I'm saddened that I didn't get to attend your earlier presentation, but I'll be sure to be watching the recording later today. I've had some experience myself with ArcGIS and ERSI. I'm a geoinformatics or geomatics engineering student myself, and also part of JAM. And one thing I've really noticed and really appreciated and want to see your kind of perspective, because it kind of ties into these policy decision, is that the power of visualization of this data. You can take very abstract concepts, very abstract ideas from your data and be able to display it in meaningful and very interesting ways. The story maps, for those unaware, are these tools that ESRI provides to kind of walk individuals through stories of data. And yeah, I was just wanting to hear your thoughts on the power of visualization of data and how it can be used to communicate messages.
Yeah, it's everything. It's literally, there was a gentleman who came to Esri at the time of our software moving from basically just desktop to the online realm. And he came from National Geographic, where he'd been the chief cartographer, and he was really into storytelling. And he helped us. He created story maps. He worked with people to create this whole universe of story maps. And now there's a whole team that works with him, a large team that creates these different templates that people use, and they really maximize the capacity for people to tell their story. And it has made a huge difference, because before you would look at a static map, or if somebody had their computer for you, you could say, okay, I'm gonna poke on this. But now that it's online, story maps can give somebody the chance to tell a story and say, here's data about it, and here's a video, and here's an image, and here's some more text, and here's another map. And to be able to integrate all of these things at once it allows people to get sucked in and use it. I'll tell you a fun little story. I actually wrote this guy a note because a couple of weeks ago, we had an ice storm. I live in Arlington, Virginia. We had an ice storm. I went outside and it was just slippy slidey. And I cut my walk short in the morning and was working my way back and was working up a hill. And I started doing that classic thing where it's just all of a sudden you're starting to slide down the hill. And I looked down, and there next to me was a nice bed of rocks right next to the sidewalk and glazed over. And I saw in my head at that instant a story map. I wanted to see the map of the storm going through the area and how much fell and what time it was and Where was the storm now? Who was it affecting now? And how are people dealing with it? Telling the story has changed people's perspectives on maps. People used to say, I hate maps. People love stories. And a map as part of a story, a map really becomes complete when it is part of a story. A story becomes complete when there's a map in it that tells the where of all of these things. They're beautiful together.
That's fantastic. No, thank you very much for that answer.
That was our last question, and being respectful of time, we're 1 minute over this time, so we were pretty good this time.
I get carried away.
It's very awesome. Charlie, our whole team and everyone here, I just want to thank you again for giving us your time this afternoon and for sharing your insight with us and your expertise. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I guess that's the end of the seminar. Thank you everybody for coming. The recording will be shared on the Slack later on. And for anyone that is not part of our organization, a link will be put up on social media that you can check out afterwards. That being said, everyone have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.